See Chapter 8. Sleep. Protect the asset. Each night, when I go to sleep, I die. And the next morning, when I wake up, I am reborn. Mahatma Gandhi. Jeff sat straight up in bed in a panic. He felt as if a bomb had exploded in his head. He was sweating and discombobulated. He listened intensely. What was going on? Everything was silent. Perhaps it was a weird reaction to something he'd eaten. He tried to go back to sleep. The next night it happened again. Then a few days later it happened in the middle of the day. He had just returned from India and at first, he thought it might be a reaction to malaria medicine he was taking in combination with the Benadryl he took to help him sleep when he was jet-lagged. But as his situation worsened, he found his condition was more complicated. It was like he was experiencing anxiety attacks, but without any anxiety, just the physical symptoms. Jeff was a textbook overachiever who had a deep desire to make a difference. To give some context for this, his grandfather was an early administrator in the Peace Corps. Jeff was fiercely ambitious, driven, and committed to making a contribution to the world. He was on the board of Kiva, he had been named Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year and a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. He was the co-founder of a successful impact investment fund, and he was the CEO of a global microcredit organization that was reaching more than 12 million poor families around the world. He was 36 years old and on top of his game. Jeff traveled constantly, which often made sleep difficult. His company was based in Seattle but had offices in San Francisco, India, and Kenya. He would routinely fly to London for meetings, then to India for 6 days to be in 5 different cities, to Geneva for hours of meetings with investors, and then back to Seattle for a day and a half. For 3 years he traveled 60 to 70% of the time. On average, he slept about 4 to 6 hours a night. But at the ripe age of 36, his pace of work was starting to threaten his health and his ability to contribute. What started with the nighttime attacks worsened. One by one each of his organs started shutting down. His heart rate was erratic. It became painful to stand up straight. He had to blend his food because he could not digest it. His blood pressure was so low, he blacked out if he stood up too fast. He went to the emergency room twice. He kept telling himself he would slow down after the next deal, then the next, then the one after that. But of course he didn't. He was sure that if he just kept going he could work his way out of this. He didn't want to face the trade-offs that scaling back entailed. But they soon caught up with him. He would be forced to cancel meetings at the last minute because he was too weak to attend, or he would give a speech but bomb it because his brain was cloudy. He started to wonder if he was doing the company more harm than good, and he definitely was. Eventually, after a clear diagnosis, he was given 2 options by his doctor. He could take medications for the rest of his life to deal with his symptoms, or he could disengage from everything for a year or 2 to treat and recover from his illness. Jeff didn't accept this trade-off at first. He was a competitive triathlete, and he thought he could apply the same logic. He would to an ankle sprain or a torn rotator cuff. He boastfully told the doctor he would take a couple of months off and be back to full form. Watch. Just watch. He took a 2-month sabbatical, and to his surprise he totally crashed. He slept 14 hours per night. Then he rested all day long. He could not even get out of bed some days. He was totally non-functional for 6 weeks. He came crawling back into his doctor and admitted this was going to take a lot longer than a couple of months. True to his word, he got rid of everything that was creating stress in his life. He resigned from his boards and decided to leave his company too. He said, "The decision to disengage was very, very difficult. I walked out of the board meeting, tears in my eyes, and said to my wife, this is not how I wanted to leave my baby." He designed a life totally devoted to regeneration and recuperation as he went through the treatment protocol. He changed his diet. He went to the south of France for a year with his family. The treatment and change in climate and lifestyle worked. With a new mindset, he began to think about what he had learned through the experience. 2.5 years later, Jeff was in Tanzania for a Young Global Leaders event with the World Economic Forum. One evening at an open mic night, Jeff was urged by those who knew his story to share what he had learned with the group of 200 accomplished peers. Through great emotion, he told them that he had paid a high price to learn a simple yet essential lesson: protect the asset. Protecting the asset. The best asset we have for making a contribution to the world is ourselves. If we underinvest in ourselves, and by that I mean our minds, our bodies, and our spirits, we damage the very tool we need to make our highest contribution. One of the most common ways people, especially ambitious, successful people, damage this asset is through a lack of sleep. If we let our type A instincts take over, we will, like Jeff, be swallowed up whole. We will burn out too early. We need to be as strategic with ourselves as we are with our careers and our businesses. We need to pace ourselves, nurture ourselves, and give ourselves fuel to explore, thrive, and perform. In the many hours Jeff spent resting, he came to see an interesting paradox in his addiction to achievement. For a type of personality, it is not hard to push oneself hard. Pushing oneself to the limit is easy. The real challenge for the person who thrives on challenges is not to work hard. He explains to any overachievers, if you think you are so tough, you can do anything, I have a challenge for you. If you really want to do something hard, say no to an opportunity so you can take a nap. By the time I was 21, I too thought of sleep as something to be avoided. To me, it was a necessary evil, a waste of time that could otherwise be spent productively, something for the weak, or the weak-willed. The vision of being superhuman and sleeping only a few hours a night was intoxicating. I even experimented with some rather drastic and unconventional ways to try to cut down on sleep. After reading a sleep study, where some participants were required to sleep only 20 minutes every 4 hours around the clock, I tried it out. It was bearable for a while, but I soon found that while you can technically survive on this schedule of sleep, it has its drawbacks. For example, while I was technically awake, my brain was just barely functioning. It was harder to think, plan, prioritize, or see the bigger picture. It was hard to make decisions or choices and nearly impossible to discern the essential from the trivial. It soon became unsustainable, but still I was determined that the less I slept, the more I could get done. So I adopted the new tactic of pulling one all-nighter per week. This was not much better. Then my wife, who did not care for this practice, gave me an article that completely shifted the way I saw sleep. It challenged the notion that sleep was an enemy of productivity, convincingly arguing that in fact sleep was a driver of peak performance. I remember the article cited top business leaders who boasted about getting a full 8 hours. I also remember Bill Clinton was quoted as saying that every major mistake he had made in his life had happened as a result of sleep deprivation. Ever since, I have tried to get 8 hours a night. What about you? Think about the last week. Have you slept less than 7 hours on any of those nights? Have you slept less than 7 hours for a few nights in a row? Have you caught yourself saying or thinking proudly, "Not me. I don't need the full 8 hours. I can totally survive on 4 or 5 hours of sleep"? If you thought that right now while reading this, you will get a lot out of this chapter. Well, while there are clearly people who can survive on fewer hours of sleep, I've found that most of them are just so used to being tired they have forgotten what it really feels like to be fully rested. The way of the non-essentialist is to see sleep as yet another burden on one's already overextended, overcommitted, busy but not always productive life. Essentialists instead see sleep as necessary for operating at high levels of contribution more of the time. This is why they systematically and deliberately build sleep into their schedules, so they can do more, achieve more, and explore more. By protecting their asset, they are able to go about their daily lives with a reserve of energy, creativity, and problem-solving ability to call upon when needed, unlike non-essentialists, who can never know when and where they'll be hijacked by their own fatigue. Essentialists choose to do one fewer thing right now in order to do more tomorrow. Yes, it is a trade-off. But this small trade-off can yield big rewards. Non-essentialist thinks 1 hour less of sleep equals knows 1 hour more of sleep equals several. 1 more hour of productivity. Sleep is for failures. Sleep is a luxury. Sleep breeds laziness. Sleep gets in the way of doing it all. more hours of much higher productivity. Sleep is for high performers. Sleep is a priority. Sleep breeds creativity. Sleep enables the highest levels of mental contribution. Shattering the sleep stigma. So if protecting the asset is so important, why do we give up our precious sleep so easily? For overachievers, part of the reason may be that they simply subscribe to the false belief, as I did, that if they sleep less they will achieve more. Yet there are ample reasons to challenge this assumption, like the growing body of research demonstrating that a good night's sleep actually makes us more productive, not less. In K. Anders Ericsson's famous study of violinists, popularized by Malcolm Gladwell as the 10,000-hour rule, Anders found that the best violinists spent more time practicing than the merely good students. His finding supports essentialist logic by showing that mastery takes focused and deliberate effort, and indeed it's encouraging to learn that excellence is within our sphere of influence rather than a blessing bestowed only on the most naturally gifted. But it also comes dangerously close to encouraging the non-essentialist mindset of I have to do it all, the pernicious myth that can lead people to justify spending longer and longer hours working with diminishing returns. That is, until we look at a less well-known finding from the same study that the second most important factor differentiating the best violinists from the good violinists was actually sleep. The best violinists slept an average of 8.6 hours in every 24-hour period, about an hour longer than the average American. Over the period of a week they also spent an average of 2.8 hours of napping in the afternoon, about 2 hours longer than the average. Sleep, the authors of the study concluded, allowed these top performers to regenerate so that they could practice with greater concentration. So yes, while they practiced more, they also got more out of those hours of practice, because they were better rested. In a Harvard Business Review article called Sleep Deficit, the Performance Killer, Charles H. Czeisler, the Baldino professor of sleep medicine at Harvard Medical School, has explained how sleep deprivation undermines high performance. He likens sleep deficit to drinking too much alcohol, explaining that pulling an all-nighter, i.e., going 24 hours without sleep, or having a week of sleeping just 4 or 5 hours a night actually induces an impairment equivalent to a blood alcohol level of 0.1%. Think about this, we would never say, this person is a great worker. He's drunk all the time. Yet we continue to celebrate people who sacrifice sleep for work. 2. While sleep is often associated with giving rest to the body, recent research shows that sleep is really more about the brain. Indeed, a study from the Lübeck University in Germany provides evidence that a full night's sleep may actually increase brain power and enhance our problem-solving ability. In the study, reported by the journal Nature, over 100 volunteers were given a number puzzle with an unconventional twist. It required finding a hidden code to uncover the answer. The volunteers were divided into 2 groups. One was allowed an 8-hour stretch of uninterrupted sleep and another group received interrupted sleep. The scientists then watched to see which volunteers found the hidden code and how quickly they found it. The result was that twice the number of people who had slept for 8 hours solved the problem than the volunteers from the sleep-deprived group. Why? The researchers explained that while we sleep, our brains are hard at work encoding and restructuring information. Therefore, when we wake up, our brains may have made new neural connections, thereby opening up a broader range of solutions to problems, literally overnight. Some good news for the early birds and night owls among us: science shows that even a nap can increase creativity. In just one example, a report from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences revealed that even a single REM, or rapid eye movement, cycle enhanced the integration of unassociated information. Even a brief period of deep sleep, in other words, helps us make the kinds of new connections that allow us to better explore our world. In a nutshell, sleep is what allows us to operate at our highest level of contribution, so that we can achieve more in less time. While there continues to be a culture of machismo when it comes to going without sleep, luckily the stigma is fading, thanks in part to a few super high performers, particularly in industries that typically celebrate burning the candle at both ends, who have publicly boasted about getting a full 8 hours. These people, many of them true essentialists, know their healthy sleep habits give them a huge competitive advantage, and they are right. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon.com, is one of them. He says, "I'm more alert and I think more clearly. I just feel so much better all day long if I've had 8 hours. Mark Andreessen, co-founder of Netscape and a reformed sleep restrictor who used to work till the early hours but still be up at 7 o'clock a.m. is another. He said, "I would spend the whole day wishing I could go home and go back to bed." Now he says of his level of sleep, 7 hours and I start to degrade. 6 is suboptimal. 5 is a big problem. 4 means I'm a zombie. On weekends he sleeps 12 plus hours. "It makes a big difference in my ability to function," he said. These executives are quoted in an article called "Sleep is the New Status Symbol for Successful Entrepreneurs." For Nancy Jeffrey of the Wall Street Journal writes, "It's official. Sleep, that rare commodity in stressed-out America, is the new status symbol." Once derided as a wimpish failing, the same 1980s overachievers who cried lunch is for losers also believed sleep is for suckers. Slumber is now being touted as the restorative companion to the creative executive mind. To this we can add that it is also the restorative companion to the discerning essentialist mind. In another article in the New York Times, Aaron Callan, the former chief financial officer of Lehman Brothers, tells the story of how, at an office party in 2005, one of my colleagues asked my then-husband what I did on weekends. She knew me as someone with great intensity and energy. "Does she kayak, go rock climbing and then run a half marathon?" she joked. "No," he answered simply, "she sleeps." And that was true. When I wasn't catching up on work, I spent my weekends recharging my batteries for the coming week. 5. So if the stigma of sleep still exists in your workplace, consider developing an initiative at work to explicitly encourage sleep. If that sounds radical, consider how the many benefits of sleep, greater creativity, enhanced productivity, even lower healthcare costs, have the potential to directly affect the bottom line. With this perspective, it is not so hard to imagine encouraging your manager or HR department to develop a written policy. After all, many companies have policies addressing alcohol consumption, and as we have seen, the parallels in how alcohol and sleep deprivation affect performance are real. For example, Charles Czeisler at Harvard has proposed a policy that no employee is expected to drive into work after a red-eye flight, and other companies allow employees to come in late after staying late at work the previous night. Companies and leaders like these know that protecting their assets is a matter of fiduciary responsibility. Under the auspices of book research, I recently went to Google to take a nap in one of their famous nap pods. It was a white spaceship pod, like something you might imagine seeing on the 70s TV show Mork and Mindy, of about 20 square feet, big enough to lie down but not completely flat. It had a dome-shaped cover that concealed most but not all of my body, and as a result I was a little self-conscious at first and wondered whether I would be able to fall asleep. 30 minutes later, as the pod vibrated gently to let me know my session was over, I didn't have to wonder. When I woke up from the nap, I could really feel how much I had needed it. I felt clearer, sharper, more alert. To use the pods at Google, there is a calendar sign-up. How many people used it the week I was there? I wondered. Of the 50 people who work on the floor where it is situated, I imagined at least 10 or 20. Wrong. According to the calendar, just a single person had taken this opportunity to recharge brain and body with 30 minutes of midday sleep. Nevertheless, even the presence of the pod is important in signaling to employees that sleep is a priority. Our highest priority is to protect our ability to prioritize. In this section of the book we have been talking about how to explore and evaluate options in order to discern the essential few from the many trivial, mediocre, or even just good. By definition, this is a process of prioritization. It includes the challenge of filtering options that, at first glance, all look important. Yet as the logic of an essentialist explains, in reality there are only a few things of exceptional value, with most everything else being of far less importance. The problem with being sleep-deprived is that it compromises our ability to tell the difference, and thus our precious ability to prioritize. Sleep will enhance your ability to explore, make connections, and do less but better throughout your waking hours. See Chapter 9.